Hi there, I'm Deputy Chief Jonathan Cox. I just want to give a quick update on the current conditions here with Cal Fire in the San Mateo County area. We usually do this presentation during the Strike Team Refresher class in person. This year we'll have to do it virtually because of the conditions, but didn't want to miss the opportunity to pass along some information that might be helpful for you as you go out on the fires and lead some crews out. Just to start things off, wanted to highlight looking backwards a little bit at last year and the years before. We saw a really low number of fires and a mild fire season last year, and that was really because we had late rain into May, and we also had really unseasonably cool weather throughout the summer months. For a point of comparison, last year about 250,000 acres of land burned in California. In 2017, it was about 1.6 million acres. In 2018, about 1.9 million acres, and then a huge drop off in 2019 with 250,000 acres. So that was last year. We obviously had a couple fires late in the season that were large and damaging, but nothing like we had seen in the years previous. As far as this year is concerned, this is obviously through April 19th. We're seeing below average fire activity so far. The 5-year average for the same time interval is about 2,399 acres. We're at about 796 right now. So although it's below average, this early in the season is really not a good indicator about what could come because we're not in our dangerous months yet. But we have had over 691 fires to date. That is more actual fires than we've seen on average across California for the last 5 years. One fire notable was on April 23rd up in Tehima Glen unit. That was in the Red Bank area. This is one of the alert wildfire cameras that was pointed in that direction. And for having just rained significantly a couple weeks ago, this fire did burn about 26 acres of timber understory. And it is an indicator that we're starting to get some initial attack fire activity starting to take place across Northern California. We look to this year and the conditions that we can expect this year. The best place to start is obviously looking at the weather and the fuels. This graph right here is the precipitation for California since the start of the water year, which is October 1st, 2019 over here, and the percent of average precipitation just for the month of March. If you look at this, the rainy season started late, but precipitation was normal from November into January. If you remember, we had quite a few large storms at the end of last year that went into about the New Year's period. After that, in February, we had a very dry spell that included a couple high pressure systems across the Bay Area. Most notable here in San Mateo County is we had a 6-acre fire up on San Bruno Mountain on February 28th, which is very unusual for the middle of winter. But we had that big dip in no rain and warm temperatures in the middle of the winter. And then we saw that unsettled weather pattern come back, and a large portion of the region got quite a bit of rainfall at the end of March and the beginning of April. It was not enough, however, to bring us above the seasonal norm because of that deficit that we had in the middle of the winter. If we look at the snowpack across the northern part of the state, this is really the percentage of snowpack April 1st, and it shows, we're at about 47%, 43 to 47% of snowpack across California. Obviously, this is because of that midwinter deficit that we saw. As far as conditions and fuel conditions are concerned across the northern part of California right now, if we take a look at the 1,000-hour fuels, fuel moistures were above normal area-wide at the end of June. This changed when that weather changed in February with that north to northeast flow that was offshore and began to dry things out. In March, this precipitation was sufficient to bring those fuel moistures back up to their norms. The normal line typically decreases this time of year, so wet weather in April could easily push these values back up to normal. Lower elevations, generally below 3,500 feet in the south and 2,500 feet in the north, are now seeing new crop growth due to that wet weather in March. Wet weather in April has allowed low elevation fine fuel crop to reach close to normal fuel loading as it begins to cure. There's also plenty of carryover in this grass from last year in that fine cured material. One thing that we should also not forget about when we talk about the fuels and the moistures across California is the tree mortality. From 2018, we had about 147 dead and dying trees across the state. This is still a problem. The California Tree Mortality Task Force have been tracking this since 2017, and specifically the central and southern Sierras are the worst off. But we're also starting to see some parts of the North Op forests have higher density of dead trees. What this means for you as strike team leaders or first responders going out is dead and dying trees and timber will enhance the fuel behavior, and they'll also resist those controls when there is ignition in the area. If we look at the weather outlook, the precipitation anomaly outlook, what we see is from May through July still shows warm and dry conditions across the region, much like what we're starting to see here at the end of April. The 3-month outlook from May through July still shows warm and dry conditions across the region when we look at the temperatures. So again, basically what this is saying is we're looking at both temperatures and precipitation being warm and dry across Northern California. As far as the fire potential goes across this area, looking at some points of consideration, some high impact short-term weather patterns are crucial for large fires to develop. These patterns include stuff like lightning events, strong north offshore wind events, your everyday heat wave. These type of weather anomalies are not easy to forecast more than 1 to 2 weeks ahead of time. So when we look at the caveat to all of this is it's typically the devil is in the details. Short-term weather impacts crucial for large fire development and events are not foreseen more than 1 to 2 weeks out. So all of these predictions and models that we look at obviously can't take into consideration those short-term weather changes that may occur. If we look at the North Ops region outlook for April through May, low-level elevation grass crops, 3,000 feet and below, have seen renewed growth since that March precipitation. Wet weather in the middle of this month allowed the fine fuel crop to reach normal fuel loading amount, so the tonnage per acre is about average. And due to the longer term rainfall deficit and warmer, drier conditions in May, it is likely that the fine fuel crop will clear out earlier than normal and initial attack for fires will ramp up in May. Large fire occurrences are not expected to increase significantly throughout May though. Middle elevations between 3,000 to 6,000 feet are too high to have the new grass crop and too low to retain snow cover. These areas are vulnerable to fire during stretches of warm and dry weather periods prior to greening up. As far as the outlook for June of 2020, lower level elevation grass crops will likely have been cured out by the beginning of June. The higher elevation snowpack is expected to be gone by early to mid-June. And June is expected to be drier and warmer than usual. Occasional lightning can be expected. Occasional north to northeast offshore wind events can also be expected, and little runoff is expected due to the light snowpack and dry fuels and soils underneath. All areas are expected to have increased amounts of initial attack in June. Most PSAs typically see an increase in the average number of large fires in June compared to May, but the northern Sierras typically don't see this increase until July. In June, it is expected that elevations below 6,000 feet in the northern Sierras will have a greater potential for large fire occurrences due to very dry conditions, and elevations above 6,000 feet will see some benefits from the snowpack into June. Looking beyond June into July, July is expected to be warmer and drier than average, and lightning activity is expected to be near normal. Fuels at mid and upper elevations will be dry enough to carry fire, leaving them vulnerable to spread. This represents an earlier start to fire season for the upper elevations by a few weeks, so any lightning will be a bigger threat than normal. When we look nationally, above normal significant fire potential begins to appear in Arizona in May. And that's really, when we look on here, this is April, we look at May, we're really looking for the red for the significant wildfire growth potential. When we go into June, we see those areas into Utah and Arizona and the northern part of California. And it's really in July, consistent with what we've just been talking about, where we see those drought-stressed fuels, areas where we've had less precipitation this year, really start to pose a threat to large fires. When we look at San Mateo County specifically, this is the Drought Monitor, and we can see that the April 23rd Drought Monitor shows severe drought conditions in the northern part of San Mateo County, and that's this kind of orange color right here. In the rest of the county, we see moderate drought conditions, and in the southern part of the county, right along the Santa Cruz County line, we just see an area that is abnormally dry for this time of year. Specifically looking at the live fuel moistures here in San Mateo County, the blue line represents the coyote brush up on Highway 35 and 92. The red is the low value. The dotted line is the average value. So we're below average. Looks like we're just looking to start peaking out a little bit later because of that late rainfall, and we should see a decrease over the coming months. When we look at the chamise up at Saratoga Summit, which is really at the southern tip of this county, in that drier portion, we see that it's about average. It's above average for this time of year, but hitting that higher threshold for what the average would be for that fuel type. And finally, the coyote brush up on Pulgus. Again, the second value that we're seeing here in the blue is we're below average for this time of year for our live fuel moistures. These live fuel moistures were the beginning of April, so we did have a bit of precipitation since then, and obviously the growth will continue as the months change. So that's kind of the look at the fire conditions, the fuels. I'd say the high-level overview is we've had less rain, we've had less precipitation, we've had less snow in Northern California. We've had a little bit of a weird weather pattern over this winter in the sense that we had normal rainfall, a big deficit, and then we recovered some later in the months. And we also have the drought returning to much of the northern part of California, which is really problematic for our firefighting potential. Beyond that, we're also contending with the fact that we have this COVID-19 pandemic playing out, and we have to think a little bit differently about how large fires are going to go down across the state. The first thing that we're giving some consideration to is what does base camp look like? And that includes everything from the feeding line, the way we are distancing apart, to the way we handle things, to any health orders that may be in place at the time or the location that the fire's at, such as face coverings, etc. There's also things to think about with procurement and logistics about purchasing things and actually getting things to the scene to support the operations. And the second part of that is the PPE that we might need in addition to our normal wildland firefighting PPE to ensure that firefighters stay safe while the pandemic is still playing out. Some other considerations for the COVID-19 is how we're going to evacuate and where we're going to evacuate the public to. If we think about mass gatherings being limited, just thinking a little bit differently with our NGO partners at the Red Cross about how we're actually going to house large populations, what that might look like with social distancing, and what are the facilities that might be available still if there are other facilities being used for the COVID pandemic. Beyond that, some considerations that I think everyone's considering at the moment is what does staffing look like if we do get an outbreak of COVID as far as the firefighting forces are concerned, as well as what is the potential alignment of the second wave of this pandemic with a very kind of vulnerable time of the year, or those fall months where we tend to get large and damaging fires. One of the considerations for safety planning purposes is just thinking about where are some of the closest facilities that you can get firefighters tested if you're at a fire in a different county, and what are the implications on being able to get rates of production or get work out of firefighters if our resources are depleted because of this pandemic. So there's a lot to think about as COVID-19 plays out. I think for all the strike team leaders in the room, it's a really important consideration to take with you when you go on the road as far as the personnel management side of things is concerned, the monitoring of health, and also in thinking about how we change our actions because of the current conditions with this disease. Here in San Mateo County, we are now at level 2 staffing, which means we have 3 Type 3 fire engines already staffed in the county. That's currently Pescadero, Skylonda, and Belmont. We plan to go to level 4 staffing end of May, beginning of June, which will bring on our 4th Cal Fire funded wildland engine. Part of Governor Newsom's increased staffing for the agency last year was to bring 13 additional fire engines online with staffing. One of those is here in San Mateo County, and that's that 4th Type 3 that we're going to have staffed here year-round, which is a big asset for us and all of our local cooperators throughout the season. Hollister Air Attack Base is already open. They have the air attack and 2 tankers available on base, so most of the county, if we need air resources, are going to be coming out of Hollister. At the moment, the helicopter is bucket drops only, so no crew yet, but that'll probably be changing in short order. As we talk about helicopters, one thing that we can expect to see this year is the new Firehawk S70I helicopters. We have taken delivery of a few of them. Training is ongoing, but they are starting to become used in our fleet. And over the next months and years, we'll still consider and start to see a considerable number of those at our fires. These copters are capable of carrying more water. They're also capable of night flying operations. As those changes take place, we'll communicate them, but be on the lookout because they're going to be used. One other really important piece that we talked about last year and a lot of hard work has gone into is the Zone Haven wildfire evacuation maps. All of the fire and law enforcement agencies in the county have now come up with a standardized set of evacuation zones. We're currently working with the Board of Supervisors on a 3-year funding plan to make this a product that we use for the long term here in San Mateo County. I think we should have more on this in the next few weeks, but it will be very important for us to roll this out to the public and to utilize it in the field as a way to communicate evacuated areas across the county. Just as a reminder for all in-county responses, Cal Fire's standard response plan for state resources on any wildland fire in the state responsibility area, the SRA, or any fire in the MTZ, the mutual threat zones in the county. Depending on the weather, we have a low, medium, and high dispatch. This is just important for initial attack here in the county to understand what is going to be responding. And just some good reminders as we go into this fire season is one, review and understand the no divert policy on aircraft. It's something that comes up every year as far as how we get aircraft and how we hold on to them and what that criteria is. 2, anticipate fewer available fire crews, hand crews, Cal Fire hand crews specifically. We have seen those numbers come down in recent months and years, and it has an impact on the ground. So you may find yourself having longer reflex times to get those crews and having slower rates of production on larger fires because there are fewer available. 3, expect to see some of those new helicopters overhead when you go on some of the larger fires, those new S70Is. And here in the county, just ensure the joint physical ICPs for all unified command incidents. As we go into this fire season, it's always good to refresh on the unified command process, but standing right next to each other, there's no substitute as we fight these fires. And with that, maybe one of the most important things to consider on these wildland incidents is identifying a single ordering point really early on so that we don't have a mix-up or redundancy in ordering of resources for these fires. Number 6, ensure that we utilize the branch and division breakouts. If you ever have a potential fire that you think is going to go big, remember branch early. Branching early helps you really grab that span of control as things progress. And finally, we're always here, phone call away. Battalion 10 or Battalion 11 is a great resource. Call them anytime, whether it's for training or information or resources. We're always on duty. We're always here to help. With that, please stay in touch. The on-duty Battalion 11 is 866-298-1711. On-duty Battalion 10 on the coast is 866-298-1712. Myself, I'm at 650-861-4084, and you can always get a hold of the Felton Command Center at 831-335-6719. With that, sorry we can't be in person. I'm glad I got to present something. I'm sorry I can't see you on the other side and have some interaction, but fingers crossed with any luck this time next year we'll be doing it again in person and we'll have some sense of normalcy. I think it's going to be a rough and bumpy fire season, especially with the pandemic that we're seeing, but we'll definitely get through it, and we'll definitely get through it with your help. Thank you.